Welcome, everybody, to the Freddie Smith Podcast. Today, we have United States Senator from Arizona, Ruben Gallego, joining the show. Senator Gallego is a Marine Corps veteran, a son of a single mother, and understands housing insecurity firsthand. And before coming to the Senate, he spent nearly a decade in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he focused a lot on housing affordability, economic mobility, and opportunities for working families. And today, we are going to dive into his comprehensive housing affordability plan. How did we get into this crisis? And what are the steps that we need to take to create a path of home ownership for the Millennials and Gen Zers and people of all generations? This is a very important conversation. I appreciate you for stopping by. So without further ado, help me welcome Senator Ruben Gallego. Senator Gallego, I appreciate you coming on the show today.
No problem, man.
Yeah, most people curl up with a romantic novel or personal development at night. I curled up with your housing affordability plan and absolutely enjoyed it. So
That's
I thank
sad, but good.
It is good. It's nice to see
I'm glad
senator.
someone actually, can go into and get excited about this stuff as me. So to be clear.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important and refreshing for the Millennials and Gen Zers to see a politician and a senator not just read headlines, but come up with an actual plan that's going to solve this crisis. So on behalf of my entire generation, we want to thank you for putting this forward. And this just means the world to us. So thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. I'm not too far removed from y'all, so.
I know. That's right. That's awesome. You're 46, correct?
46, yep.
All right. So we're in the same ballpark. I'm almost 38, so I love that. We need some youth in Congress. That's awesome. But just to give a snapshot before we get into the few questions here that you have on your plan, just to show everyone who's listening, just the crisis that we're in. 40 is the median age for the first-time home buyer in 2025.
Yep.
Up from 31 in 2014. So 9 more years. So that 40 years old would be 22 years after graduating high school. That's a lot of delayed gratification.
Well, it's also, that's the thing. It's not just like the issue of gratification. It throws off everything, right? And this is what I'm trying to communicate to my older colleagues. Like, it stops people from getting married, having kids. It also is a pretty good predictor about generational wealth, right?
Yeah.
So, we're good. This generation, and people of my age and people younger that don't have homes now, are going to be the poorest American generation since prior to World War II. Because every generation since World War II has been able to live off generational wealth that was basically done by the housing boom, right? And so the housing boom created all these young families with some equity. Then they passed on a lot of the riches from that equity to their kids, and their kids kept on going because there was an available supply that actually met the demand, and they kept on growing with that wealth. This generation doesn't get that, right? And that's the thing that's like makes this very existential, is the fact that it's like this is not a 10-year thing. This is an immediate situation problem now, because this generation is just going to be poorer and poorer as things go on.
Absolutely. And we feel that. And that's what we're trying to fight for here. And it seems like one of the biggest issue is supply. That's all we hear about is supply. When did we first notice that supply was an issue, and why was nothing done? Like, why haven't we built more if we noticed supply was an issue a decade or two ago, whenever that started?
So I think, being in Arizona, and I think for us, the supply side of the housing didn't really start to around COVID. And I think in other parts of the country that was happening. But when you're kind of in your own little local world, it's a totally different situation. The other problem is that we've always had this attitude as a country, like, move to where the housing is cheap, right? The problem with that is, like, that wasn't the case where housing is expensive no matter what. And a lot of times it matches also the salary that you get. And so you could move to parts of the Midwest, for example, that are very cheap, but then also the salaries probably don't even match that level of housing, because the cost of housing, because the supply just doesn't exist there. And so we could go into details if you want about what I believe is the cause of that, but it's just a combination of a lot of things too. It's also the miscoordination of an alignment of goals here, because you have too many people, and this is not necessarily something that we could just fix overnight, that are involved in the housing situation, situation, let's just call it, that are at different levels. So you got the federal issues, you got local issues when it comes to zoning. Sometimes you even have local counties and states that have different regulations. Then you have insurance companies. Then you actually have the labor itself. Then you actually have the finance side of itself. So there's so many different things that are happening right now that really create the ecosystem around housing, that if it only takes a couple of things to go wrong, that you find yourself in this situation.
Got it. And then what would you say about the builders? Do you feel they're charging appropriately because labor and costs have gone up? And if you were to get some of these regulations cut or some of the affordability go down, how do we know that the builders aren't just going to look at a development and go, "Oh, we're saving 3 mil on this development. Let's just keep that for ourselves rather than
Yeah.
bringing it to the homeowner."
Well, the most important thing we can do to make sure that this doesn't end up being like a home builder like profit plan, is to make sure that you actually flood the zone with supply. So there's actually real supply and demand. So that way there is competition that's happening. If we have, not if we increase supply, but not to the point where it actually creates an environment for the buyer, then yeah, the supplier is going to end up doing it. But the supplier being the home builder. So we need to make sure our movements have to be very, very, very strong to the point where it actually brings as much housing and as fast as possible. So it actually brings down the costs of the individual unit, and then the buyer then has more leverage when it comes to the time to go and buy.
And what do you think the biggest affordability issue is for a buyer right now? Because I know you talked about potentially bringing down or a pilot program for 0 to 1% down.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the down payment being the biggest stressor, or the actual qualifying / affording the total monthly payment? Because
It's a total monthly payment. And like, look, I grew up poor working class, and I remember getting my first place, and I was just like, I was more worried about the monthly payment, right? Because right now, even if you can get a FHA loan, you're looking at 3.5% down, which when your average home price is around $500,000. That's starting to get sizable, which is why I want to move to a 1%. But even if you do that, you're looking at, with rates around between, I think, around 6.5 right now, to some degrees. 6.5 at $500,000 is very, very cost prohibitive when you have declining wages in this country and inflation going up, and not to include what's happening with property insurance, right? So figuring out how to bring the overall cost down. Now, a healthy down payment obviously does that, right? The problem that happens with a healthy down payment is that there aren't that many people that have, kind of a fluid when it comes to cash. So I have a portion of my bill that deals with that, where you could just take money out of your IRA without any penalty, or your family can. So if your grandparents or somebody or your parents want to help you out, and it could be two people, then you have something that works. And that means that $400,000 home is now being bought at $300,000, for example, if you use your IRA or something like that. Why does that matter? Is because we actually do see this a lot. We see a lot of people that are retirement rich at 30, but they're housing poor. And if you think about it, like, we're going to send these people potentially into retirement without actually having a house that's paid off. You'd rather have them be in a home, building equity in that home, potentially pay off by the time they're retiring, or being such in a good position that they can actually sell and use that as retirement income. But right now, we have such a misalignment when it comes to our what we do in the Senate, in government, is that we emphasize the stability and richness of people as they age more. We don't actually have any type of real focus on trying to emphasize the stability and the wealth creation for people that are really still growing, still getting up and going to work, and still raising families in this country.
Absolutely. And having those milestones means something. Like, my wife and I, we rented for
Yeah.
17 years. We finally bought 3 years ago, and you just psychologically feel like you took a step.
100%. And
we
it's look,
feel
it's better. It's better for communities. Like,
Yeah.
and I'll give you a good example. My mom, after our father, my father abandoned us, she moved into an apartment, and it was a very stable apartment, but it was an apartment. I slept on the floor. My sister slept in their room. She slept in her room, and we were there basically until I went to college. Right before college, I helped her get her first house. And so as I'm leaving, I got a house. And why did we get her a house? Because I had 3 other sisters, and I knew that a house meant stability, that she knew who the neighbors were always going to be, that there was skin in the game for everyone around that area, that she was going to be able to talk to, lean to, that there was some people that actually knew the community and had been for a while, and that they were going to take care of the family. It's extremely important. I have kids, for example, I have 3 kids. It was important for me to have a house before I had kids. And right now I have, a house in Arizona that has enough room for all the kids. And right now, like crazy, my wife and I are thinking about having one at another point. And already I'm looking around saying, like, where can I fit this other kid? The fact that I even have a house to start from is such a privilege, right? And there's so many other families that just don't have that. And we really, we as government need to figure out how to make that happen.
Absolutely. And speaking of rent too, this is such a huge topic because if we cannot buy a house for a year, 10 years, what are we doing in the meantime? Renting. And
Right.
rent back in the 70s and 80s used to take up maybe 20, 25% of your income. Now it's taking up 30, 40, 50% in some of the major
Yep.
metros. So we're getting hit double whammy here. So what would the plan do to maybe alleviate some of the rent pressure for
Sure.
people who are forced to rent or choosing to rent?
Well, some of the stuff we do right there, for example, is we offer the people that develop these multi-housing units money and loans to actually be able to build faster. A lot of the rent and the increase you've seen again is an issue of supply and demand. Some of it is an issue of NIMBYism. Nobody wants to have an apartment building that lives next to them, even though people that live in apartments are your everyday Americans. When I used to work at the city government as for I was chief of staff for a council member. I used to go to these planning and zoning meetings, and people would say, the kind of people that grew up in apartments. I'm like, yeah, me, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
out of my house, I obviously wasn't a senator there, but there was of the four kids that they lived in with this apartment, two of them ended up going to Ivy Leagues. The other two are great American citizens, businesswomen, teachers. My sister's a blood cancer doctor. But NIMBYism was the first issue. Number two is that because of NIMBYism, there was just not a lot of reason for developers to develop because you're getting a lot of money if you have less and less supply. And so now creating the environment where you can have medium-sized developers, sometimes just family themselves, just build that triplex, the duplex, or the multiplex, makes a big difference. But we didn't actually ever have the financing tools to do that. You'd have to basically be a big institutional investor in order to make some of these bigger places. And that's not necessarily a problem, but some of these, in order for you to make something very profitable and get this kind of loan that you needed, it means you need huge plots of land. There aren't many huge plots of land left within the cities that people want to move to and work from, right? So we have to figure out how to move that. There's the portion of this that I talk about us having like essentially an RFP for all federal buildings, right?
Mhm.
Where we would basically tear down I'll give you a good example, tear down the first floor of a post office. And, if the developer comes in, they're willing to take it on, they could rebuild the post office. And then all the floors above that can be, affordable housing, like condos for sale, but it would be restricted to people under the age of 40. And we incentivize the developer from doing this because we wouldn't put any zoning restrictions on it because we'd keep it under federal property, right? So
Yeah.
it's a win-win for everybody there. We put more housing on the market. The developer gets to get basically a quick turnaround on pay, and we again are able to at least give stability to that individual person.
I love that. I love that. And then just a couple more questions here for you. When it comes to Wall Street purchasing up homes, I know that you mentioned that in some, you know, situations, people with a lot of money are being able to raise money is what's helping with affordable housing. But
Yeah.
in other instances, maybe in the single family home portion of it, what do you say about banning Wall Street or institutional investors? Do you find that to be a major problem or kind of a blip on the map compared to other things?
It's one of many blips. So we do have, you can't deny that it's not having some effect. But we need to make sure we correct it, in the right way. So what I don't want is, major investors not investing in multifamily homes, right?
Yeah.
That's multifamily housing, I should say, like big apartments. We want that. I'm actually even fine with like massive build to rent scale housing, right? Because again, that's adding more supply. What I am against is what you have happening with a lot of individual companies. I'm sorry, individual housing that is essentially being bought up by huge individual investors, which is usually cash offers that the person that's trying to buy through a mortgage is not going to be able to compete against, right? So we need to make sure that we restrict in that world because that is something that is going to be extremely, it's not detrimental, but it's just a total disadvantage to the individual buyer. Now, does that mean we do outright bans? I think it has to depend on the area. It has to depend on what's happening in terms of the concentration, the market concentration of power. If they own too much land, if these major investors own too much land, too much property, then that becomes more of a monopoly, and then that is really anti-consumer. But we can't just close our eyes to it and say like this is not happening. Clearly, it's happening. Clearly, it has some effect. Let's diagnose it correctly and have a right a right fix to it, because again, what we want to do is have as much available on the market as possible. I'd love to just flood the zone to make sure that things are affordable, and that the individual home buyer has a fighting chance to actually have that home.
I love that. And lastly, when you're talking about all this stuff, this all sounds fantastic. I don't understand why anyone would be against it or why it would be a challenge. What do you think is the biggest challenge that you might face bringing this in? Or again, over 12, 15 years, this data has been around. Why hasn't some of this already been done? Like, what's the red tape here?
It's a combination of a lot of things, right? And it's a combination of problems that have persisted from Democratic to Republican administrations, and then now back to Republican administrations. This happens in blue states, happens in red states. It's just a combination of, again, so many layers and so many things go into home building that sometimes people just don't understand. Let's look at it, for example, even on the immigration front, right? Because of our immigration policies, the amount of people that come in to build, housing using, the different visas or different types of immigration status has diminished extremely. That's going to drive up costs right there, right? The amount of people that actually can build the homes aren't around right now. Does that mean we have to open the borders again, and let anybody who wants to come in and grab a hammer, work here in this country legally? No, but what about we're realistic and work to get some visas so people can come in and build this housing? Let's look at our tariff policy. A lot of the timber and studs that go into building these places come from overseas, particularly Canada. So when we have policies that deal with tariff policy, we're potentially adding costs on there, right? Air conditioning units, for example. Some of these things aren't getting built because of parts that are coming from overseas. All these things start adding up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Financial monetary policy makes a big difference, right? We're increasing the interest rates because we're borrowing so much money right now, right? We're borrowing money because we keep passing these tax cuts that we can't really fulfill. So we go back onto the market and we keep borrowing money and we're creating this instability. All these things contribute to the cost of it. And the problem is the people that actually have the most power tend to be the people that are already stable, already have a house, and tend to be 65. They're the people that are already thinking about what retirement looks like, or they are in retirement, versus what they're looking forward to, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
your perspective on life is entirely different when you're 25, you graduate college, than when you're 65 and your kids are out of college, right?
Yeah.
But the person that's most likely to vote is the person that's 65. That person doesn't want necessarily prices to go down when it comes to housing, right? And if you flood too much homes on the market, that's what's going to happen potentially.
Yeah.
Now, we have a lot of ways we could fix this too. I do think there's something to be said about if you've owned a home forever and you want to sell that house, why are we going to tax you on your capital gains for that house? Because that's what's happening right now. There's a lot of seniors that will not leave their home, because if they leave their home and buy another house, they're going to get taxed on the money that the capital gains they've accumulated on that home, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's better for the country that seniors can just downsize without there being a taxable event, right? So you know what? Yes, you made $1.5 million on that home you bought in 1990. You're going to walk away with at least a good chunk of that tax-free. Go get yourself a condo that is 1/3 the value of it. Get to pocket the money, but now you open up that house to that young family, right? We need to find a way to kind of bridge the generational divide, because the worst thing we could do is just keep putting off, the real transfer of wealth that's going to happen at some point. And at some point, the boomers are going to die, and then they're going to hand off a lot of the homes and their equity to these younger family members. But these are people that aren't going to see it until in their 50s, into the 60s, right? That doesn't help anything at all. We need the situation to change right now. And so I'm all about a multi-layered, multi-generational path to making sure that we have more affordable housing. And we really have to take risks too. I know people think it's crazy, but I think looking at 1% down payment loans is a good idea. Why? If you have good credit history, right? And I'm saying you have to have good credit history,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a steady job, that it's the determination whether or not you're going to be able to get a home is going to be 2.5% difference, because your FHA loan's already at 3.5% anyway. So what 1%, when you have a steady job, is going to encourage a lot of people to do it. Being able to take, borrow money from your 401k, that helps you put your down payment down. Like all these things are we need to be able to put together to bring that person in their 30s into a house, into a situation that's going to be economically stable to them for quite a while.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you again, this is so refreshing to hear somebody at your position talking about this. You're speaking our language. This is what we want to hear. So I thank you for being on the show, and I wish you all the best. I'm going to keep following you very closely and see
Thank you.
what we can get past and really help out the millennials and Gen Zers. And like you said, taking care of the boomers as well. That's
Yep.
going to be wonderful. So thank you so much, Senator. I really appreciate your time.
You too, man. Thank you.